Under the radiant glow of crystal chandeliers in the Hawthorne mansion, the atmosphere of the elite gala pulsed with opulence. The clink of champagne flutes mingled with refined laughter. The scent of expensive perfume wafted through the vast space. Gilded walls reflected the light, crafting a scene as dazzling as a dream. Yet beneath the glamour lurked the cold calculations of the powerful. At the heart of the room stood Nathan Blake, a young millionaire with a razor-sharp smile and confident gaze, commanding the space like a king in his realm. His tailored black suit hugged his tall frame perfectly, every gesture drawing eyes, from powerful tycoons to glamorous ladies in evening gowns. But tonight, Nathan's gaze didn't linger on the distinguished guests. It settled in a shadowed corner, where a maid quietly cleared empty glasses. Clara Monroe, in a simple black and white uniform, her brown hair neatly tied back, moved through the crowd like an invisible wisp. Her hands worked swiftly, her eyes cast downward, yet a quiet resilience marked her every move. Nathan watched her, not for beauty or prominence, but for an odd sensation, as if she hid something, a secret just beyond his grasp. The crowd hushed as Victor Crane, Nathan's closest friend, approached, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. His sly grin tightened the air. With a provocative tone, Victor issued a daring bet. $10 million that Nathan couldn't marry Clara, a mere maid, and transform her into a high society lady in 6 months. Whispers rippled through the room. Curious eyes turned to Nathan. His pride stung, a fire flared in his gaze. "Accepted," he declared, his voice low but sharp, a smirk curling with confidence. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, as if witnessing a thrilling drama unfold. But in that moment, Clara looked up, her eyes meeting Nathan's by chance. For a fleeting second, he caught a strange glint. Not fear, not timidity, but a subtle challenge. She quickly turned away, resuming her work, yet Nathan felt a jolt race down his spine. He didn't know this decision was more than a game. It was the first step into a storm of deception, love, and secrets that could shatter everything. Clara, whom he thought a poor, controllable girl, carried a dark past, and the Hawthorne mansion would soon become a battlefield of schemes and untamed emotions. Nathan left the room, champagne still in hand, but his mind was ensnared by Clara. He told himself it was just a game, a chance to prove his invincibility. Yet deep in his chest, unease crept in, as if he'd opened a door without knowing whether paradise or perdition lay beyond. In the corner, Clara wiped a glass, her hands trembling slightly. She knew Nathan's gaze, knew the bet had been made, though she hadn't caught every word. In her heart, a long-buried plan stirred, and Nathan Blake, with all his arrogance, had just stepped into the trap she'd set. That night, as the mansion fell silent, Clara stood alone in the small staff room, moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating her face. In her hand was an old, worn photograph of a middle-aged man with a warm smile. Her father, Edward Vaughn, who lost everything to Nathan Blake 10 years ago. She gripped the photo tightly, her eyes gleaming with resolve. "I'll take back what we lost," she whispered, her voice soft but icy. Nathan's bet was the perfect opportunity, but she hadn't anticipated that her long-frozen heart might stir for the very man she vowed to destroy. As the moonlight faded, Clara tucked the photo away, steeling herself for the days ahead. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, where every step teetered between revenge and survival. Across the mansion, Nathan stood by the window of his lavish bedroom, gazing at the glittering city. He thought of Clara, her enigmatic eyes, and told himself she was just a pawn. But in the darkness, a faint voice whispered he might be underestimating his opponent. The Hawthorne mansion, with all its splendor, now felt like a stage where two hearts clashed, unaware of the fate awaiting them. And you, my dear American audience, stay tuned to see which path he'll choose. For sometimes, the most unexpected moments spark the greatest transformations. So, before you settle in, Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from across the globe. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the Hawthorne estate, casting golden rays across the gilded walls and gleaming marble floors. In the sprawling kitchen, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the steady trickle of water from the sink, where Clara Monroe scrubbed the crystal glasses left over from last night's gala. Her hands moved swiftly, but her eyes carried a quiet melancholy, as if each glass held a fragment of a memory she longed to erase. Clad in a simple black and white uniform, her brown hair neatly tied back, she seemed a seamless part of this opulent scene, yet her heart belonged to another world, a world of interior design sketches, buried dreams, and the lingering pain of her past. The kitchen's serenity shattered when Nathan Blake strode in, his pale gray suit radiating cold authority. The polished leather of his shoes clicked rhythmically against the floor, like the heartbeat of a predator. He paused at the marble counter, his piercing gaze sweeping over Clara. But she didn't look up, continuing her work as if he were an invisible shadow. Without a word of greeting, Nathan slid a check across the counter, the sum glimmering like a life-altering promise: $5 million. "You'll be my wife for 6 months," he said, his voice low and steely. "In return, you'll have enough money to never bow to anyone again." Clara froze, her wet hands trembling faintly in the sink. A crystal glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor with a piercing crash, its fragments sparkling like unshed tears. She turned, her eyes flashing with a mix of shock and disdain. "What kind of game is this?" she demanded, her voice quivering yet sharp like a finely honed blade. Nathan shrugged, his smirk dripping with arrogance. "No game, Clara. An opportunity. You're a maid, a nobody, perfect for my plan." His words struck like a dagger, slicing into her pride while exposing a vulnerability she couldn't hide. Clara wanted to scream, to shove him out of the kitchen and tell him to take his money and disappear. But the image of her mother flashed in her mind, lying frail in a hospital bed, her breath shallow, medical bills piling up like an insurmountable mountain. Sleepless nights, relentless debt notices, and the terror of losing the only family she had left rooted her to the spot. She glanced at the check, its numbers a beacon in the darkness, promising salvation, but also gleaming with the allure of a trap. "Why me?" she asked, her voice softer, almost a whisper, as if she dreaded the answer. Nathan tilted his head, his eyes appraising her like a commodity. "Because you don't belong in this world," he said evenly. "You're a challenge, and I never lose." His words were not just a declaration of war, but a cruel reminder of the chasm between them. He was the king, and she was merely a pawn. Clara's lips tightened, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to refuse, to protect the tattered remnants of her dignity, but the harsh reality held her captive, like invisible chains. In that moment, she remembered her small apartment, where interior design sketches lay scattered across the table. Curved chairs, rustic wooden tables, dreams of one day building a brand of her own. But those dreams now felt distant, buried under the weight of bills and her mother's plea. "Don't leave me, Clara." She took a deep breath, swallowing the tears threatening to spill, and looked Nathan squarely in the eyes. "Fine," she said, her voice quiet but resolute, as if she'd just signed her own sentence. Nathan nodded, his expression unwavering, as if he'd merely closed a business deal. "Good," he said, then turned and left, the echo of his shoes reverberating through the vast space. Clara stood alone, her gaze fixed on the check, its numbers whispering of freedom, but warning of the price she'd pay. She gathered the shards of the broken glass from the floor, their sharp edges nicking her fingers, a reminder that this game would not be easy. She knew she'd just stepped into a labyrinth where truth and deception intertwined, and her heart might be the first casualty. But in the kitchen's stillness, a smoldering fire ignited within Clara. She wasn't just Clara Monroe, the maid. She was Clara Vaughn, daughter of Edward Vaughn, who lost everything to Nathan Blake 10 years ago. This cruel bet was the perfect opportunity to draw closer to her goal, dismantling his empire and reclaiming what her father lost. She gripped the crystal shard tightly, blood seeping from a small cut, but she felt no pain. Instead, a cold determination surged within her. Nathan thought he controlled the game, but he didn't know Clara had set a trap of her own. She tucked the check into her pocket, a dangerous glint flashing in her eyes. The Hawthorne estate, with all its dazzling beauty, was now her battlefield. Every step, every smile, every word would be a move in her plan for vengeance. But deep within, a faint voice whispered, warning that her heart, long frozen, might thaw for the very man she vowed to destroy. Clara shook her head, dismissing the thought, and returned to the sink, resuming her work as if nothing had happened. Yet in her eyes a storm was quietly brewing, ready to sweep everything away. The sleek black limousine glided through the city's opulent streets, neon lights reflecting off its tinted windows like lost stars. Inside, the air was heavy, filled only with the low hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of Clara Monroe's breathing, now bearing the title of Mrs. Blake. She sat rigid on the leather seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the simple wedding dress, a surprise gift from Nathan, clinging to her body like a reminder of her new role. Across from her, Nathan silently scrolled through his phone, the blue glow of the screen illuminating his sharp, cold features. Not a word, not a glance exchanged. Just a silence as sharp as a blade, slicing through the chasm between two souls from utterly different worlds. Clara gazed out the window, her eyes lost in the blur of passing cars and glittering skyscrapers. Just hours ago, she had stood in the marriage registry office, a grand but frigid building where everything unfolded with ruthless precision. Papers were signed, vows recited mechanically, devoid of emotion, as if they were sealing a business deal rather than a wedding. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Clara felt a void spread through her chest, as though she'd surrendered a piece of her soul. Nathan shook the officiant's hand, flashed a polite smile, and led her to the car. No congratulations, no shared moment. It was all a meticulously staged performance, and she was the reluctant star. The car halted before the Hawthorne estate's grand gates, the massive iron doors swinging open to reveal a cobblestone path leading to the magnificent mansion. Clara stepped out, her heels clicking against the ground, each step a hammer striking her heart. Nathan walked ahead, never looking back, as if her presence were a mere detail in his grand scheme. An elderly butler, Mrs. Eleanor, greeted them with a refined smile, her eyes brimming with curiosity. "Welcome, Mrs. Blake," she said, her voice gentle but unable to mask her scrutiny. Clara nodded, forcing a smile, but the title Mrs. Blake felt like a curse, heavy and alien. Mrs. Eleanor guided Clara through the estate's lavish corridors, where ancient paintings adorned the walls and light from crystal chandeliers danced across marble floors. They paused before an opulent bedroom, larger than the modest apartment Clara once called home. Deep green velvet drapes cascaded to the floor. A vast silk bed gleamed white, and a wardrobe brimmed with designer gowns that sparkled under the light. "This is your room," Mrs. Eleanor said before departing, leaving Clara alone in the unfamiliar space. She stood in the center, the wedding dress still clinging to her, feeling like a bird in a gilded cage, beautiful, but unable to fly. Nathan appeared at the threshold, his gaze sweeping over her, sharp but devoid of warmth. "Starting tomorrow, you'll learn to become a high society lady," he said, his tone flat, like he was reciting contract terms. "Attend events, mingle with the elite, and convince them this marriage is real. Don't disappoint me." Clara's lips tightened, his arrogance igniting a spark of defiance. "And if I don't want to?" she asked, her voice soft but cutting, like a finely honed dagger. Nathan tilted his head, a smirk curling his lips, void of amusement. "You signed the contract, Clara. You have no choice." His words stung like a slap, but Clara didn't bow her head. She met his gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm not your puppet, Blake," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm doing this for my mother, not for you." Nathan's brow furrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes, but he said nothing. He turned and left, leaving Clara with a mix of triumph and unease. She knew she'd just declared war, but in this game, every word, every action was a perilous move. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, her trembling hands peeling off the wedding dress, revealing chilled skin beneath the thin silk. She opened her small purse and pulled out an old, worn photograph of her father, Edward Vaughn, his warm smile captured beside a wooden table he'd designed. 10 years ago, Nathan Blake, with the ruthlessness of a young tycoon, had manipulated the market, driving her father's furniture company into bankruptcy. Edward lost everything: his reputation, his fortune, and ultimately his life, leaving Clara and her mother in destitution. Clara clutched the photo, tears threatening to spill but held back by cold determination. "I'll make him pay, Dad," she whispered, her voice soft but steely. Nathan's bet was the perfect chance to get close to him, infiltrate his world, and dismantle the empire he'd built. She'd planned this for years, disguising herself as Clara Monroe, an anonymous maid, to avoid suspicion. But standing in this lavish room, a thread of unease wove through her. Nathan's gaze, though arrogant, had a sharpness that unnerved her. He wasn't easily manipulated, and every moment with him tested her plan. Clara tucked the photo away, stood, and faced the mirror. Her face, though weary, radiated resilience. She would play this game, not for Nathan, but for justice, for her father, and for herself. But as she switched off the light, darkness enveloped the room, and a faint voice echoed in her mind. "Can you keep your heart from wavering?" Clara shook her head, banishing the thought, and closed her eyes, trying to sink into sleep. Yet Nathan's image, his smirking lips, his piercing eyes, lingered, a warning that this game might not only destroy him, but could unravel her as well. The Hawthorne estate, with all its dazzling splendor, now felt like a labyrinth, where each step Clara took teetered on the edge of revenge and survival. She knew she had to be strong, but in the darkness, her heart beat faster, as if sensing a storm on the horizon. The morning light poured through the heavy emerald velvet drapes, bathing Clara's opulent bedroom in a soft golden glow. She awoke on the vast silk bed, her breath still heavy from a dream of her father. His warm smile, his rough hand on her shoulder, his hopeful eyes as he spoke of furniture designs that would change the world. But the dream dissolved, leaving her in the cold reality of the Hawthorne estate, where she bore the title of Mrs. Blake, a name that didn't belong to her. Clara sat up, her bare feet meeting the cool marble floor, a familiar sense of alienation rising within her, as if she were a stranger lost in her own life. She walked to the wardrobe, where designer gowns shimmered under the light, each one a reminder of the role she was forced to play. Clara chose a pearl-colored silk dress, simple yet elegant, unwilling to let the extravagance eclipse her true self. As she stood before the mirror, adjusting her brown hair, her eyes met their own reflection, sharp, brimming with both pain and resolve. Today was the first day of the training Nathan had decreed, a journey to transform her from Clara Monroe, the maid, into a flawless high society lady. But Clara knew each step in this world wasn't just to win Nathan's bet, It was to draw closer to her true goal, destroying him. The grand breakfast room of Hawthorne gleamed with silver and crystal, the aroma of toasted bread and rich coffee filling the air. Nathan was already seated at the head of the table, his charcoal suit hugging his frame, his eyes scanning a financial newspaper. Clara entered, feeling his presence like an invisible weight pressing against her. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over her, not with admiration, but as if appraising an unfinished project. Without a greeting, he nodded toward the chair opposite, and Clara sat, her hands resting lightly on her lap, striving to appear calm despite her racing heart. Breakfast passed in silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery on porcelain plates. Clara nibbled a piece of toast, the butter melting on her tongue, but she tasted nothing. Her mind drifted to her old apartment, where she and her mother shared modest breakfasts, stale bread and cold tea, filled with laughter. The memory tightened her chest, but she masked it with a sip of coffee, unwilling to let Nathan glimpse her vulnerability. He, as if sensing her thoughts, set the newspaper down, his piercing eyes locking onto her. No words were spoken, but Clara felt the curiosity in his stare, as if he were probing beneath her composed exterior. After breakfast, a team of experts arrived, turning the estate's corridors into an impromptu fashion runway. A stylist, Vivian, with platinum hair and a polished smile, led the group. Gowns of silk, satin, and velvet were presented, each a work of art, but to Clara they felt like heavy armor, concealing her true self. She stood before the mirror, trying on dress after dress, while Vivian directed every detail, her posture, her movements, her smile. "You must exude natural elegance," Vivian said, her voice gentle but firm. Clara nodded, but inside, she felt like a marionette, strings pulled by unseen hands.
Next came etiquette lessons with Margaret, a specialist in social graces. In the lavish drawing room, Margaret taught Clara how to hold a wine glass, respond to prying questions from the elite, and maintain a smile even when insulted. Clara listened, practicing each gesture. But every correction from Margaret, "Don't slouch, you must project confidence," was a reminder that she didn't belong here. She thought of her mother, of the days they sketched designs on the kitchen table, and a quiet ache stirred within her. But she hid it, keeping her face serene, her eyes sharp, as if daring the world to break her. Nathan watched from a distance, leaning against the drawing room's threshold, hands in his pockets. He didn't intervene, only observed, but Clara felt his gaze like a current across her skin. There was something in his look, not just control, but a flicker of curiosity, as if he were trying to unravel her. Clara turned away, focusing on the lesson, but her heart beat faster. She knew she had to be cautious. Every moment with Nathan was a chance to advance her revenge, but also a risk of exposing her secrets. When the training ended, Clara was allowed to rest in her room. She sat by the window, gazing at Hawthorne's lush garden, where vibrant red roses swayed in the breeze. She pulled her father's worn photograph from her purse, her fingers tracing his face, a surge of strength rising within her. Edward Vaughn had lost everything to Nathan Blake, and Clara would not let that be in vain. She envisioned the day Nathan's company crumbled, the day she restored her father's legacy. But Nathan's image, his piercing eyes, his low voice, intruded, disrupting her thoughts. She tucked the photo away and walked to the small writing desk in the room. An old notebook lay there, filled with her interior design sketches, curved chairs, rustic tables, dreams now buried. She flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling as they grazed her own drawings. This was Clara Vaughn, not Clara Monroe, not Mrs. Blake. She took a deep breath, closed the notebook, and looked out at the garden. She would play this game. Become the high society lady Nathan demanded, but not to please him. Every smile, every gesture would be a step toward the day she brought Nathan to his knees, begging for mercy. But as she switched off the light and lay in bed, darkness enveloped the room and unease crept in. She thought of Nathan's gaze, the subtle curiosity in his eyes, and wondered if he suspected something. She closed her eyes, trying to banish his image, but her heart pounded, as if sensing an undercurrent approaching. The Hawthorne estate, with its dazzling splendor, now felt like a chessboard, where each move Clara made balanced on the edge of justice and peril. She knew she had to be strong, but in the darkness, a faint voice whispered that this game might not only destroy Nathan, it could destroy her too. The warm golden glow of Étoile's chandeliers flooded the room, glinting off crystal glasses and polished silverware. Heavy crimson velvet drapes cascaded to the floor, shielding the hustle of the city outside, crafting an isolated world of opulence and power. Clara stepped inside, her sapphire silk gown hugging her frame, its rich hue accentuating the deep brown of her eyes. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor. She was Mrs. Blake, Nathan Blake's wife, but under the scrutinizing gazes of the elite, she felt like prey entering a lion's den. Her heart pounded, not from the splendor around her, but from the fear of being exposed. Not just as Clara Monroe, the maid, but as Clara Vaughn, a woman carrying a burning vendetta. Nathan walked beside her, his hand lightly resting on her back, a courteous gesture devoid of warmth. His black suit exuded authority, and the polite smile on his lips was a perfect mask. The crowd parted as they moved toward a private dining area, where the city's most powerful figures had gathered. Whispers rippled through the room, curious eyes raking over Clara like invisible blades slicing into her fragile confidence. She kept her back straight, chin lifted, but her hands clasped tightly under the table to hide their trembling. This was her debut as Mrs. Blake, and the slightest misstep could shatter the carefully crafted facade she'd built. The dinner began, exquisite dishes served in dignified silence. Clara took a bite of pan-seared cod, the herbs melting on her tongue, but she tasted nothing. Her mind was consumed with observing the guests, businessmen in tailored suits, glamorous women dripping in diamonds, and Victor Crane, the instigator of the fateful bet, sitting across from her with a mocking smile that never faded. He leaned toward Clara, his glass of red wine glinting in his hand. "Mrs. Blake," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You truly are a rough gem. Nathan must have worked hard to polish you into this." His words were an arrow aimed at her pride, and the stifled chuckles from other guests made her feel stripped bare. Clara's lips tightened, her eyes flashing with defiance. She set her fork down, the motion slow and deliberate, and met Victor's gaze head-on. "And you," she replied, her voice soft but sharp as a blade, "must enjoy playing games with others to mask your own mediocrity." The room fell silent, as if the air itself had paused. A few discreet laughs broke the tension, and Victor, flustered, took a hasty sip of wine, his face flushing. Clara felt Nathan's gaze beside her. Not anger, but a flicker of surprise mixed with respect, though he said nothing. In that moment, she wasn't just the maid or Mrs. Blake. She was Clara Vaughn, unyielding before anyone. The dinner continued, but Clara had transformed. No longer a passive figure enduring judgmental stares, she responded to questions with practiced finesse, her voice carrying a sincerity that caught some guests off guard. An elderly woman, her pearl necklace gleaming, asked about Clara and Nathan's love story, her eyes brimming with curiosity. Clara smiled, her gaze briefly flicking to Nathan, and said they found each other in unexpected circumstances. Her words were vague enough to satisfy prying minds, yet honest enough to make Nathan tilt his head, as if trying to decipher her further. As they left Étoile, the city's light streamed through the limousine's windows, casting a soft glow on Clara's face. She exhaled, the tension melting away, as if she'd just emerged from an invisible battle. Nathan broke the silence, his voice carrying a rare warmth. "You did well," he said, his eyes fixed on the window. Clara shrugged, hiding the flutter in her chest. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, her tone calm but edged with defiance. Nathan didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, as if he relished her stubbornness. Back at Hawthorne, Clara entered her lavish bedroom, slipping off her heels and sinking into an armchair by the window. She gazed at the garden, where red roses swayed in the night breeze, and felt a surge of newfound strength. Tonight, she'd proven she could hold her own in Nathan's world, not as a puppet, but as a formidable opponent. But as she pulled her father's worn photograph from her purse, her fingers tracing his face, a wave of emotion crashed over her. She recalled the days her father taught her to sketch designs, his voice brimming with hope. "One day, Clara, you'll build something lasting." Nathan Blake had stolen that dream, and she would never forgive him. She rose, walked to the writing desk, and opened her old sketchbook. Her drawings, curved chairs, rustic tables, were a reminder of her true self. She turned to a blank page and began to sketch, her fingers moving swiftly, as if releasing pent-up emotions. The drawing was a dining table, simple yet elegant, echoing her father's style. She smiled, a bittersweet curve of her lips, and whispered, "I'll do it, Dad. I'll take it all back." But as she closed the sketchbook, Nathan's image resurfaced. His curious eyes, his low voice, and unease crept in. She was playing a dangerous game, and every moment with him tested her resolve. She switched off the light and lay in bed, but sleep eluded her. Darkness enveloped the room and her heart raced, as if sensing a cold wind approaching. She thought of Nathan's gaze at Étoile, the fleeting respect in his eyes, and wondered if he suspected anything. She closed her eyes, trying to banish his image, but a faint voice warned that this game might not only destroy Nathan, it could drag her into the abyss. The Hawthorne estate, with its dazzling grandeur, now felt like an arena where Clara battled not just Nathan, but her own heart. The days at the Hawthorne estate unfolded with a new rhythm, like a symphony both alluring and perilous. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, bathing the lavish corridors in a radiant golden glow. But Clara Vaughn felt as though she were walking a tightrope, each moment a test of her resilience and her vendetta. To the elite, she had become Mrs. Blake, adorned in elegant silk gowns, moving with practiced confidence, her perfect smile concealing the smoldering fire within. Yet beneath this facade, she remained Clara, daughter of Edward Vaughn, driven by a mission to restore justice for her father and their shattered family. Each morning, Clara awoke in her opulent bedroom, her gaze drifting to the vibrant red roses in the garden outside, their petals glistening like drops of blood in the dawn's light. She opened her old sketchbook, her fingers tracing her father's drawings, rustic wooden tables, gracefully curved chairs, and felt a surge of strength rise within her. These sketches were more than memories. They were a reminder of why she was here. To dismantle Nathan Blake's empire, the man who had stolen everything from her family. But with each day spent near Nathan, she sensed a subtle shift, like cracks forming in thin ice, making her wonder if she was losing control. From his sprawling office, Nathan watched Clara with growing curiosity. He was accustomed to commanding everything: his company, his staff, even the women who had entered his life. But Clara was a puzzle he couldn't solve. She wasn't like the high society women with their artificial smiles or calculated agendas. Her quiet resilience, the sharp eyes hiding an untold story, drew him in, despite his efforts to deny it. He told himself this was just part of the bet, a game to prove his invincibility. But each time Clara appeared, with a cup of herbal tea in the evening, or a biting retort at an event, he felt an unfamiliar stirring, as if she were challenging not only his plans, but his heart. The evenings at Hawthorne became rare moments of authenticity between them. Clara began bringing tea to Nathan's office, not out of duty, but because she realized these moments were chances to understand him, to uncover a chink in his iron armor. One night, as moonlight spilled through the window, casting a silvery sheen across the room, Clara set a steaming cup of tea on his desk, its herbal aroma filling the air. Nathan looked up from his paperwork, his eyes softer than usual. He said nothing, only nodded, but as she turned to leave, he spoke, his voice low and unexpectedly warm. "You're not like them," he said, his gaze fixed on the tea. "The women I've known, they always wanted something from me." Clara paused, her heart racing, but she maintained her composure. She turned back, her eyes sweeping over him, weighing whether this was a trap or a fleeting moment of truth. "Maybe because I don't want anything from you," she replied, her voice soft but laced with defiance. Nathan's brow furrowed, but a faint smile tugged at his lips, as if he savored her stubbornness. The conversation stretched on, unplanned by either of them. Nathan spoke of a lonely childhood, raised under the weight of a wealthy but cold father who measured worth solely by success. Clara listened without judgment, and for the first time, she saw him not just as an arrogant tycoon, but as a man carrying invisible scars. But when Nathan asked about her, a jolt ran through Clara. She couldn't reveal the truth, that she was Clara Vaughn, daughter of Edward Vaughn, the man he had unwittingly destroyed. She smiled, deflecting with a vague story about her days as a maid, but Nathan's sharp, curious eyes unnerved her. He was like a hunter, searching for a trace, and Clara knew she had to be more cautious. She left the office, her heart pounding, a mix of triumph and unease swirling within her. Each moment with Nathan was a step closer to her revenge, but also a risk of exposing her secret. In the days that followed, Clara grew more adept in her role as Mrs. Blake. She glided through high society events, from charity auctions to cocktail parties, always at Nathan's side with a flawless smile and polished grace. The elite began to notice her, not just as Nathan's wife, but for her intelligence and resilience. One evening, at an auction, Clara offered a sharp insight about an antique painting, silencing the room before it erupted in applause. Nathan, standing beside her, looked at her with a new expression. Not just respect, but a quiet admiration, as if seeing her for the first time. But Clara's confidence was tested when a message arrived from the hospital. Her mother's condition was worsening, and she needed funds for an urgent surgery. The fear of losing her mother hit like a blow to the chest, leaving her reeling. Standing in her lavish bedroom, gazing at the rose garden, she felt a wave of helplessness rise. She needed money, and Nathan was her only resource. But asking for his help meant admitting dependence, something she'd sworn never to do. She clutched her father's photograph, her fingers trembling, and whispered, "I have to be strong, Dad. I won't let him see me weak." She resolved to act on her own. In a reckless moment, Clara slipped into Nathan's office while he was away, searching for documents that could hasten her revenge. Her heart pounded as she opened a hidden safe behind a painting, discovering a file of old records. Among them were papers tied to her father's company merger 10 years ago, proof of Nathan's ruthless tactics. She snapped photos of the documents, each image a bullet in her arsenal. But as she closed the safe, footsteps echoed behind her. She spun around, her heart nearly stopping, but the hallway was empty. She escaped, but the feeling of being watched clung to her like a shadow in the dark. Back in her room, she hid the phone in a drawer and sank onto the edge of the bed. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing her in a silvery glow, but her heart was heavy. She had drawn closer to her goal, But each step in Nathan's world made her feel she was losing pieces of her true self. She thought of her mother, her father, and Nathan's eyes, his curiosity, his admiration, and wondered if she was losing herself in this game. The Hawthorne estate, with its dazzling grandeur, now felt like a labyrinth, where Clara had to navigate without letting her heart stray.
The neon lights of the city glimmered outside the penthouse windows of the Hawthorne estate, but inside Nathan Blake's sprawling office, the air was thick, heavy with the tension of an impending storm. Clara Vaughn stood before his desk, her hands clasped tightly to conceal their trembling, her heart pounding as if it might shatter her chest. Scattered across the desk were the documents she'd photographed from Nathan's safe, each page a silent accusation of his ruthless past. She had meticulously planned to use them to expose the truth about the merger that destroyed her father's company. But now, as Nathan entered the room, his eyes cold and sharp as steel, she felt like prey cornered against a wall. She had been discovered. Just hours earlier, as Clara arranged the dining table for a dinner party, Victor Crane had appeared at Hawthorne, his venomous smile gleaming like a wolf stalking its quarry. He didn't mince words, his voice dripping with malicious glee as he revealed the bet in front of her. "You're just a game, Clara," he sneered, his eyes glinting with cruel delight. "A maid for Nathan to prove he can mold anyone." His words were a dagger, tearing through the fragile facade Clara had built, shattering the tentative trust she'd begun to feel for Nathan. She turned to Nathan, who had just entered the room, her eyes pleading for him to deny it. But his silence was the most devastating confession. His face, usually sharp and confident, was rigid, his eyes darkened by an emotion she couldn't decipher. Clara felt the world tilt beneath her, the moments of authenticity between them, the herbal tea in his office, his admiring glance at Étoile, the stories of his lonely childhood, now lay shattered like jagged glass, too sharp to piece back together. She wanted to scream, to shove him out of her life, but the pain of betrayal choked her. She stood tall, chin lifted, but her voice trembled as she locked eyes with him. "You're despicable," she said, each word a poisoned arrow fired from her broken heart. Without waiting for a response, she turned and strode out, leaving Nathan in a heavy silence, as if the air had been sucked from the room. She fled to her room, slamming the door and collapsing against the cold wood, her back pressed to its surface. Tears finally fell, scorching her cheeks, but not for Nathan. She wept for her mother, fighting illness in the hospital, for her father, who lost everything to Nathan's cruelty, and for herself, who had let her heart waver, even for a moment. She pulled her father's photograph from her purse, her fingers tracing his face, and a fire ignited within her, burning away the pain. "I won't fail you, Dad," she whispered, her voice soft but steely. She rose, wiped her tears, and opened her phone, reviewing the photos of the documents. These were her weapons, proof of Nathan's crimes, and she would use them to destroy him. But her plan faltered when Nathan knocked on her door the next morning. She opened it, her eyes icy, braced for an excuse or a threat. But he stood there, not in a suit, but in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes heavy with a weariness she'd never seen. He didn't apologize or justify himself, only handed her a file, records from the hospital where her mother was being treated. "I've covered all the costs for your mother's surgery," he said, his voice low, devoid of arrogance. "You don't have to worry anymore." Clara froze, her hand trembling as she took the file, gratitude and fury surging within her. "This isn't how you buy me," she snapped, her voice cutting, but his eyes, sincere, tinged with remorse, made her waver. Nathan left, leaving Clara in a whirlwind of emotions. That afternoon, she rushed to the hospital, sitting by her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand. Her mother, though weak, smiled, her eyes bright with hope upon learning the surgery was arranged. Clara held her close, tears falling silently. But her heart was in turmoil. Nathan had done something she hadn't expected, yet she couldn't forget the truth. He was the man who ruined her family. She returned to Hawthorne, resolved to accelerate her revenge. But each step through the estate now carried a new weight. She stood on a precipice, where justice and gratitude intertwined, and every choice risked pulling her into the abyss. That night, Clara slipped into Nathan's office again, her pulse racing as she accessed his computer, searching for more evidence. She downloaded old emails, exchanges between Nathan and partners during her father's company merger. Each line was a stab, confirming his ruthlessness, manipulative strategies, lies that drove her father to ruin. She saved them to a USB drive, a mix of triumph and pain coursing through her. But as she shut down the computer, a faint sound echoed from the hallway. She turned, the darkness swallowing the room, but she sensed eyes watching her. She fled to her room, the feeling of being hunted trailing her like a specter in a nightmare. She sat on her bed, clutching the USB drive, moonlight streaming through the window, cloaking her in a silvery glow. She thought of her mother, her father, and Nathan, the man who saved her mother but destroyed her family. She opened her sketchbook, her fingers grazing her drawings, a quiet ache stirring within her. She was closer to her goal, but each moment with Nathan made her feel she was losing her true self. She recalled his eyes when he handed her the hospital file, the fleeting sincerity in his voice, and wondered if he was truly the enemy she believed. The Hawthorne estate, with its dazzling splendor, now felt like a crucible, where Clara faced not only Nathan, but her own heart, stirring despite her resistance. She closed her eyes, trying to sink into sleep, but Nathan's image, his weary eyes, his low voice, lingered, a warning that this game was growing more complex than she'd anticipated. She gripped the USB drive, resolved to stay the course, but a faint voice whispered in the darkness, cautioning that she might not only destroy Nathan, but herself. She opened her eyes, gazing at the vibrant red roses in the moonlit garden, and felt a cold breeze slip through the window, as if fate were signaling what lay ahead. The morning sunlight flooded the garden behind the Hawthorne estate, casting a radiant golden glow over the vibrant red roses, as if nature itself were trying to soothe invisible wounds. Clara Vaughn stood on the balcony of her lavish bedroom, clutching her old sketchbook, her father's drawings, rustic tables, elegantly curved chairs, a silent flame keeping her anchored. A gentle breeze stirred her brown hair, and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of roses, seeking calm amid the storm of emotions swirling within her. The estate, with its dazzling grandeur, was no longer a gilded cage but a battlefield where she confronted her past, Nathan Blake, and her own heart. In the days following the incident in Nathan's office, Clara lived in a state of constant vigilance, like a predator ready to flee or fight. The USB drive holding proof of his crimes, emails, contracts, and manipulative strategies that ruined her father's company, lay safely in her desk drawer, but each time she touched it, unease surged within her. She was closer than ever to her revenge, but Nathan's gaze, his unexpected sincerity in covering her mother's surgery costs, and their fleeting moments of authenticity made her waver. She told herself he was the enemy, that his every action was part of the game, but her heart, despite her efforts to suppress it, quietly betrayed her. Nathan, meanwhile, was gripped by a turmoil he couldn't name. He was used to controlling everything, but Clara was an unpredictable variable. Her resilience, the sharp eyes hiding an untold story, and her bold stand against Victor at Etoile consumed his thoughts. He told himself the bet was the only reason he kept her close, but each time he saw her, bringing herbal tea to his office, smiling at guests at events, he felt an unfamiliar stirring, as if she were silently dismantling the walls around his heart. He knew she was hiding something, and the sensation of being watched in his office that night fueled his suspicions. Yet he didn't want to believe Clara could be his adversary. One afternoon, Clara received news from the hospital. Her mother's surgery was a success, and she was recovering. Sitting by her mother's bedside, holding her frail hand, Clara felt relief wash over her. Her mother, though weak, smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Clara," she whispered, and Clara bowed her head, silent tears falling. But as she left the hospital, her triumph was overshadowed by a new pain. Nathan had done what she couldn't, saved her mother, and it complicated her quest for revenge. She thought of her father, his designs, and wondered if justice was worth sacrificing her heart. Determined to regain control, Clara accelerated her plan. She contacted a veteran journalist who had once investigated Nathan's dealings, sending select documents from the USB drive, demanding anonymity. She knew this was a double-edged sword. If successful, Nathan's company would collapse, but if it failed, she could lose everything. Each night, she lay in bed, gazing at the rose garden, a profound loneliness enveloping her. She thought of her moments with Nathan, his gaze at Étoile, his low voice recounting his childhood, and wondered if she was going too far. But fate gave Clara no time to hesitate. One evening, as she prepared for a dinner party at Hawthorne, Victor Crane appeared, not with his usual mocking grin, but with a cold, dangerous glint in his eyes. He pulled her into a secluded corner, his voice low and sharp as a blade. "I know what you're doing, Clara," he hissed, his eyes gleaming with menace. "Those documents. You think you're clever, but you're playing a bigger game than you realize." Clara froze, her heart pounding, but she maintained her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice icy, but Victor's laugh sent a chill through her. "You'll regret this," he said, then walked away, leaving her with a fear she'd never known. That night, the dinner party at Hawthorne unfolded in tense silence. Clara stood beside Nathan, her perfect smile masking the storm within. She felt Victor's gaze from across the room, like a wolf stalking its prey, and knew her time was running out. As the guests departed, Nathan unexpectedly held her back, his eyes heavy with suspicion. "What's going on, Clara?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "I know you're hiding something." Clara wanted to deny it, but his gaze, angry yet pained, left her speechless. She turned and left the room, her heart heavy, as if she'd just missed a chance to be honest. The next morning, an article exploded online, exposing details of Edward Vaughn's company merger 10 years ago, with evidence pointing directly at Nathan. His company's stocks plummeted, and the Hawthorne estate descended into chaos. Nathan summoned Clara to his office, his face pale, his eyes darkened by betrayal. "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice trembling as if unwilling to believe. Clara stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I'm Clara Vaughn," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Edward Vaughn's daughter. You destroyed my family, and I came here for justice." Her confession struck like lightning, shattering everything between them. Nathan staggered, his hands gripping the desk, his eyes brimming with pain and regret. He remembered Edward Vaughn, a business rival he'd defeated in a ruthless deal, unaware he had a daughter. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know about you." Clara looked at him, tears falling silently, but she stood firm. "But you did it," she said. "And I fell in love with you, even though I didn't want to." Her admission was a dagger, wounding not just Nathan but herself. Nathan stepped closer, his hands trembling, as if wanting to touch her but afraid to. "Let me make it right," he said, his voice breaking. "Not just for you, but for your father." Clara met his gaze, seeing sincerity and pain, and felt her heart soften. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Together," she whispered. They stood there, bathed in morning light, holding hands, the rose garden outside glowing vibrantly, symbolizing a new beginning. Nathan vowed to restore her father's legacy, and Clara promised to stay by his side, not for money, but for love. The Hawthorne estate, once a battlefield, became a place to heal wounds, to move beyond the shadows of the past toward the light of forgiveness and hope. Their story doesn't end here. Clara and Nathan embarked on a new journey, reviving Vaughn Designs, building a brand rooted in love and trust. But the past left lingering shadows, and questions of forgiveness remained. Could Clara fully release her hatred? Could Nathan atone for his wrongs? Their journey carries a timeless lesson. Love, forged in pain, can heal the deepest scars if both dare to face the truth. So, to my dear listeners, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and stay tuned for the next chapter, because the twists are far from over. Please share this story with your friends to spread its message of forgiveness and hope. Subscribe to Millionaire Stories Best, hit the notification bell, and join us as we explore dramatic tales of love where hearts always find light in the darkness. Are you ready for the next story? In the comments below, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love hearing from our global community. And if you found this story captivating, drop a 1 in the comments to inspire us to bring you more unforgettable tales. Let's keep the journey going.